My name is Rich Salz. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm happy to welcome you all. It is so good to be together on this day, the last day of 2023. As Unitarian Universalists, we are a people of a diverse beliefs. We share a common faith, however, that every person is worthy of love, that what we do in and for this world matters, and that we are connected by an interdependent web to one another and to the earth. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome here. You're now invited to sit back, relax, put your cell phones on silent, take a few deep breaths in and out, and let your body, mind, and heart rest in this space as we spend the next hour or so together in worship.
This morning, we light our chalice with these words by Deborah Burrell. Fire consumes and casts a bright light. May our chalice flame consume our regrets for the past, our fears about the future, and our worries about today. May it light for us a path of joy and peace now. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit for the singing of our opening hymn 112, Do You Hear? Stand through the sky, through the land, do you hear? In the hearts of the flame, in the vein, on the vein, in the sun, in the rain, do you hear? Do you hear? Through the roar, through the rush, through the throng, through the brush, do you hear in the hush of your soul, of your soul? Hear the cry, still, hear the heart's revolt will, hear a sigh start to thrill in your soul, in your from the place where you stand, the strand, do you hear, oh my friend? Do you hear? Do you hear? Oh, dreams, all dares, all sighs, all prayers, they are yours, mine, theirs. Do you hear? One way in which we open our hearts each week is with the sharing of joys and concerns. As we enter into this time of sharing, I invite you to join in singing with us side one of May Love Be Your Guide. You'll look for the white card on the pew in front of you, maybe sticking out of the hymn book. You might even find it on the floor. But there's only one that is a single sheet. One side says one, and the other side says two. May you to dream dreams. May you dare to act. May love be your God. When we give, time and time again, each time we say yes. Yes to sharing ourselves and our gifts with our faith community? Yes. As we share with our physical community? And yes, as we bring our gifts of love into the world. Should silence me or not, I never want to lie. Should silence me or not, and the days the whole night time, my dear, of kindness yet for the sake of old lang syne. As we begin a brand new year, let us look ahead and say, we try to do our very best to improve our FBK. This is our home, our spiritual home. Direct the difference in a world of bitterness and strife. For the sake of old lang syne. This reading is called The Unified Field Theory by Tim Joseph, slightly altered. In the beginning, there was Aristotle, and objects at rest tended to remain at rest, and objects in motion tended to come to rest. And soon, everything was at rest. And God saw that it was boring. Then God created Newton, and objects at rest tended to remain at rest, but objects in motion tended to remain in motion. And energy was conserved, and momentum was conserved, and matter was conserved. And God saw that it was conservative. Then God created Einstein, and everything was relative. Fast things became short. Straight things became curved. And the universe was filled with inertial frames. And God saw that it was relatively general, but some of it was especially relative. Then God created Bohr, and there was the principle. And the principle was quantum, and all things were quantized. But some things were still relative. And God saw that it was confusing. Then God was going to create M, and M would have unified, and M would have been one. But it was the seventh day, and God rested. And objects at rest tend to remain at rest.
Good morning. It is nice to see so many people here today on this, the last day of the year, as I said. I wasn't nervous. I cut myself shaving, had nothing to do with it. Also, I think I made it through the hardest part of the service, which is I didn't drop any of the candles when I was down there. I was repeatedly told not to take the low attendance personally. As some of you know, the Soul Matters theme for this month is mystery. I have to confess that I think they took the easy way out by choosing mystery for December. Between Christmas, families getting back together to celebrate the holidays or figuring out the mystery of how they'll get back together, and the end of the year, it seems like an easy and obvious choice. Our fourth UU principle in the back of the order of service states that we affirm and promote, quote, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, end quote. That got me thinking, what happens during that search when you find aspects of truth and or meaning that are irrelevant to you? It seems to me that unless you're a saint, and I don't think our faith tradition has saints as such, you're going to change. I recently looked through my Kindle library and found out that I've read many books about how the mind works and how to change it. You could call them self-help books. Some, Atomic Habits, How to Change, really are self-help. Some are more highfalutin than that. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Economic Prize, and I don't think he would expect to find his book on thinking fast and slow in the Amazon self-help section. By the way, I found that book to be a slog and don't recommend it. If you're curious, read the Wikipedia page on it because it's only one page long and really describes what's going on. Anyhow, this trend of mine started a few years ago when I was reading about habits. But it occurred to me last month as I was starting to work out what to say today, that the real mystery for many people is change. How does it happen? And on a day like today, New Year's Eve, how can we be more effective in making the changes that we actually want to have happen? Change is rarely instantaneous, except perhaps in religion. Many faiths have revelation as an important part of their founding or history. Here are some examples I found. I should point out they're in alphabetical order, no priorities. In Christianity, Saul was walking to Damascus, saw a vision of Jesus who spoke to him. He converted, changed his name to Paul, and became an ardent apostle. The most ancient texts of Hinduism, and I apologize for my pronunciation, are described as Apurushaya, meaning not created by humans, divine revelation. In the Islamic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad received the Quran as revelations from the words that the angel Gabriel spoke to him. In the Jewish tradition, the Torah was given to Moses after the Jews fled from their bondage in Egypt. The Latter-day Saint movement teaches that they began with a revelation from God in the form of the angel Moroni to their founder and prophet Joseph Smith. The Sikhs consider their holy book, Guru Granth Sahib, to be a divine revelation from God to the first group of Sikh gurus. Our Unitarian faith does not have anything like this. We don't have the concept of a revelation or multiple revelations over time stating what to do or believe. In fact, our living tradition of faith says that we must commit ourselves regularly to revisiting our principles and purposes to ensure that they remain relevant. As we grow in understanding, they must change in order to grow as well. I'm not saying the other faiths are wrong or that we are better, just that we're different. In other words, while some religions may say, let us proclaim the mystery of faith, we say, we must enable the mystery of change. We are doing this. Emily spoke earlier this year about the Article 2 revision task force and said she'll be talking about it more as we work through, as Unitarians, the proposed changes. As a side note, however, we do have two founding documents. When the Unitarian Universalist Association was created in 1961, they're a mouthful. Chapter 146 of the Acts of 1960 of the Massachusetts Legislature and Chapter 827 of the Acts of 1960 of the New York State Legislature. I find it amusing because those two acts recognize the formation of the UUA. I find it amusing and in its practical business-like way, completely representative of my faith. So let me talk about change. Change happens at different speeds, and that speed is very important. For example, a major issue in front of the entire world today is how fast is the climate changing? When writing this, I thought I had a great example of a slow change. I'd like to encourage you to look at the side, either side, out the windows. Notice the light through one of the panes, and then slowly move your head to the left or right and see how it distorts. This is an example, I thought, of a real slow change. Since these windows were first made, the glass, which was a super thick viscous liquid actually, has shifted so that you get distortion. This is a change taking place over decades. Unfortunately, it's not true. It's widely repeated as misinformation on the internet and by high school chemistry teachers everywhere, which is where I learned it. I then repeated it to some people here a few years ago. Trying to follow the fourth principle of a responsible search, I have to confess that I was wrong. It turns out, according to the director of the Corning Museum of Glass, that the reason for the distortions are purely imperfect manufacturing. Rats. It was a great story, though. Time is important, though, when discussing change. How do people think about time? It turns out that most people don't perceive time as a continuum or a stream. Our lives are not a river. Instead, we think of our lives as episodes. We create internal story arcs from the notable incidents or chapters in our lives. One chapter might start the day you move into your first dorm or apartment, the college years. One might be when you and 5 friends end up in the big city in amazing apartments, the Friends era. The retirement years, the time I tried to live in another country, and so on. As we start a new chapter, it is almost as if your previous attempts to change can be wiped away. Those were the failures of another person. That was the old me. It's a do-over. Dates, pardon me. Chapters also happen on important dates, birthday, anniversaries, and of course, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. Not surprisingly, gym memberships rise dramatically in January. New beginnings help us overcome an obstacle to making change, the sense that we failed before and we will therefore fail again. This time I really am going to quit. These new chapters are moments when the labels we use to describe ourselves shift. We go from student to professional, single to married, perhaps to divorced or widowed, to married again. from New Englander to California or vice versa. These changes are pretty sudden at the flip of a switch. Labels matter to our behavior. When we're labeled voters instead of people who vote, or self-help readers instead of someone who reads a lot of self-help books, it influences how we act, not just how we describe ourselves. Take a moment and try to think of something about yourself this way. Use I am. It's not, I attend First Parish Kingston, but rather, I am a Unitarian who was part of this church. Thinking of yourself as someone who is something makes it easier to start doing the things such a person would do. Aristotle said this 2,500 years ago. Quote, "For the things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. Men become builders by building, and musicians by playing music. So too we become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, brave by doing brave acts." One way to summarize that today is fake it until you make it, but it does lose a lot in the translation. When we start to do these kinds of acts, exercise, eating healthy, or whatever, we focus on the long-term goal. We don't do anything that might lessen the short-term pain. We are overconfident in what our future selves can do, expecting future me will be able to make good choices, be disciplined, and not give in to the distractions, temptations, and other small obstacles that present me has been trying to avoid forever. Next time it will be better. I have learned from my mistakes. Starting at a new chapter or milestone helps, but it is not always enough. You need to sweeten the deal. Julie Andrews originally turned down the role of Mary Poppins because she didn't like one of the songs. Walt Disney told the songwriters, Richard and Robert Sherman, to write something more catchy. As Bob Sherman was searching frantically for a new idea, his 8-year-old son came home and reported that he had just got the polio vaccine back when they did that kind of thing at school. Bob said, "Did the shot hurt?" His son said, "No, they just put the drop of medicine on a sugar cube." And the rest is history. Not a fan of the treadmill? Perhaps the only time you set aside to read trashy novels or self-help books is when you're exercising. Want to eat better? Focus first on taste, and don't leave the grocery store with bundles of kale and quinoa without first having a plan for them. Been there, done that in the compost. Work your way into it. Start with small side dishes, shrink the size of the meat portion, and so on. Invert the Catholic meatless Fridays and save the less helpful stuff for celebrating the victories, such as making it through a tough week at work. If I can only make it through this 4-hour Zoom meeting, I will have fish and chips for dinner tonight. Take the mulligan or a cheat day. Slip-ups happen, so factor them in. Rather than planning and expecting to do a healthy walk every day, set your goal to walk 5 days out of 7. Knowing there will be gaps can avoid what's called abstinence violation effect, in which you say, screw it, I missed one day, I'm in for a penny, in for a dollar, and let it slide even more. I learned the hard way that indulging in extra sweets shows up on the scale the second day. That's really, really not fair. If I eat too much chocolate on Monday, and then Tuesday morning, I don't see any sign that I gained weight, I can continue eating chocolate on Tuesday. Of course, it turns out on Wednesday, I realized what I did. The numbers have increased, and I was already sliding down that slippery slope. People don't fail at resolutions as much as we think they do. It is a common trope and joke premise in our society. About 40% of New Year's resolutions are successful. It's pretty impressive if you measure it 6 months later. And that was a study that was reported in 1988 in CNN. Finally, recognize that change is something for the long haul. We UUs recognize that in our faith. We individuals need to recognize that in ourselves. I will always have to exercise to avoid getting overweight, but I am okay with that because I am a Peloton biker. Who do you want to be?
Please rise in body or spirit for our closing hymn, 1037 in the Teal hymnal. We begin again in love. Each other.
For, for each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible,
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
for each time that we have struck out in anger without just cause,
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
for each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others,
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
for the selfishness that sets us apart and alone,
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
for falling short of the admonition of the Spirit,
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
for losing sight of our unity,
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
for those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
A benediction is the bestowal of a blessing upon the congregation at the end of a service. Please be seated. I don't feel comfortable doing that as I'm not qualified. So instead, I will quote some of the bumper stickers that I saw in our parking lot across the street. Visualize world peace. Coexist. Side with love. Think globally, act locally. May it be so, and Happy New Year.
Good job. It felt like the whole service